Okay, so I'm going to get started now. We got 21 people logged in, so we've definitely beaten last night's webinar in terms of attendees. So I'm just going to launch the PowerPoint here, if I can, close all the windows. So just finally, for those of you who've logged in late, you should see the PowerPoint slide as a dominating part of the screen, and then you should see me in the smaller part. So what we're really going to try and do today is trying to take some of the information that you would have covered during the Meta for Sports program, in particular the chapter on emotions, and take it to the next level. Feedback was received from the previous webinar on motivation, where some of you felt like there was a fair amount of repetition that took place. That was completely fair enough. One of the slight dilemmas that we had, got a raised hand here, so I'll just acknowledge that. So one of the slight dilemmas that we have is that we're aware that not everybody has watched the entire Meta for Sports program, and that some of you probably watched it 3 times, some of you have watched it once, and there's a whole bunch of you who haven't even watched it at all. So how do we cover as much as possible with that kind of variation? So I'm just going to assume that most of you have watched the emotions section of the Meta for Sports program and therefore are aware of the basics, and therefore I'll be taking some of that basic information a couple of steps further today to hopefully give you some very specific takeaway, practical, applied techniques on how to manage your emotions a little bit better. Okay, so we're going to start with a poll. You'll notice that I'm going to use the poll feature pretty frequently over the next 50 minutes. Really nice little way to make sure that the fact that we are separated in different locations is not does not have a negative impact on what we're trying to achieve. Yeah, so first question I've got is a 2-part question really, is what is an emotion or what is not an emotion? So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to launch a poll, and I'm going to get you to try and select the emotions from the non-emotions. So that should have appeared on your screen. So I'll give you about a minute, maybe a minute and 20 seconds. Have a think about it. So which of these is not an emotion, and you can select more than one answer if you wish to. Okay, half of you have answered in half the time, which is good. So I'll just give you 15 more seconds. There's a couple of people still thinking about it. 15 of the 19 of you have answered the question. So 4 of you remaining. I'll give you 10 seconds. Have a think about it. Go with your gut instinct, and then I will end the poll and share the answers with you. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Click now or forever hold your peace. End the poll. And now I'm going to share the answers to you. So it looks like most of you picked that the only one of those 10 items that is not an emotion is quitting, which of course is an action. All the rest are emotions. And as you can see there, quite a few of you have selected some of the emotions as being non-emotions, which would suggest to me that as a general rule, those of you who are watching this evening are not necessarily excellent at distinguishing emotions from thoughts from actions. And one of the underlying aspects of mental toughness is the ability to do that. So I'll just spend 30 seconds giving you a bit of I suppose, a bit of a workaround on how to do that. So very simply, actions are things that people can see you doing. So they're very much doing words. And you can see there that the word quitting is very much a doing word. And those actions are quite different from your thoughts, which, if you think about it, other people cannot identify, so they cannot read your mind. Even if it looks like you're thinking something, there's no way that they can actually know what you're thinking. And of course, in turn, those are different from emotions. And for many, many, many years, psychologists and other different people kind of sort of thought they were all very much linked. And they are linked. They are linked, let's be honest. If you are if you have just quit, you probably had a whole bunch of thoughts about, okay, I'm going to stop now. And there was probably some emotions attached to that as well, you know, such as being incredibly fatigued, for example, or just over it. But what we now know is that although they might be linked, actions, thoughts, and emotions, they might be linked, it's much more beneficial if we can try and address them individually. And the way I kind of like to think of it is a bit like a cake. You know, a cake is made up of, for example, flour, eggs, and milk. And we can think of the cake as a cake and that they're kind of all involved in one another. But if we're really trying to improve the quality of the cake, it might be a case of trying to get the best eggs we can, the best flour we can, the best milk we can. And that's what we're doing by separating emotions, thoughts, and actions there. We're saying, let's just focus on that. And if it has a positive impact on some of the other two areas, then fantastic. Just to emphasize my point, why quitting there is the only non-emotion of the entire lot. We have no idea why the person quit. You know, one of the things that very few of you probably thought when you clicked on quitting was the race, for example, may have been called off, in which case there may have been no emotions or no thoughts related to quitting, but it may have been, sorry, we have to cancel this and move to another day, and therefore you have stopped, which of course is another word for quitting. So that's the first thing that I would invite you to work on, the ability to separate your emotions from your thoughts, from your actions. And you'll see, if it's not obvious already, exactly why that is so beneficial. So let's move on. And I suppose the next natural question when we are exploring emotions is, which emotion is experienced the most by competitive athletes? And interestingly enough, we already know the question to this. And not only do we know the question to this in terms of all athletes right across the world, competitive athletes right across the world, we actually have some data from you, the athletes of the Illawarra Academy of Sport, because as you may recall, in either December or January, you would have filled in the mental toughness questionnaire. One of the questions you may remember was, please describe in detail how you felt during competitions, specifically in terms of how relaxed you were, how confident you were, and how much you enjoyed them. Excuse me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to open up a Word document. Oops. Okay, no problem. I'm going to click on here, my backup. I'm just going to open up a Word document, and let's see if I can share this with you. New share, Word document, there it is. And I'm going to share it. Now this is a copy and paste of all the answers that you gave to that question. You can see it goes on for pages and pages and pages. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to type the word nervous into the search section. And as you can see there, Microsoft Word is highlighting in yellow. I might just zoom in a little bit, maybe. Yep. The number of times the word nervous has appeared in your answers when you completed that mental toughness questionnaire. Of course, I've removed all names. So even though your answer's in there, there's no way of knowing who it is. And as you can see, if I scroll down slowly, the word nervous appears all the time. In fact, it's appeared in about 50% of the answers. So of all the answers from all the athletes, about 1 in 2 suggested that nervous energy, anxiety played some kind of a role. And in the majority of the cases, the context was I was very nervous and it had a negative impact on my ability to perform at my best. So I'm not going to read out any of the questions, but you get my point that nerves are obviously one of the areas that we're going to most benefit from addressing. So that's what I'm going to do for the rest of today's webinar. So I'm just going to close that, and I'm going to see if I can open up the PowerPoint again. Yesterday we had some practice, so that should appear again. So there we go. So we know the answer to this question. Interestingly, of course, your answers are very much the same as the answers given by all athletes right across the world. So nervous energy is regarded as the most significant emotion for people who are trying to compete at a high level in sport. So there's a couple of things I just want to say about nerves in particular, and that is that nerves are not a bad thing. In fact, let's actually expand that a little bit, and I would say it's probably highly useful, highly recommended for you not to try and consider emotions to be good and bad. So as human beings, and I've been informed the vast majority of you are human beings, a good 90%, just kidding, of course. As human beings, you are very emotional. There's a reason for it. We've got a huge frontal lobe of our brain. The part of our brain which controls emotion is normally the size of most other animals' entire brain. And so there's a very good reason for that. And there's a few questions which you submitted beforehand about, is it actually a good idea to try and suppress negative emotions? I'll get to that toward the end, but in this instance, we just want to start by saying there really are no good and bad emotions. And if we're going to focus the rest of the webinar on nerves, mainly because of its frequency in terms of your experiences, we really want to use nerves as an example of why there are no good and bad emotions. So most of the context with which you've written you experience nerves were in a description which sounded very negative. I was so nervous before the competition that I couldn't eat, for example, or that I used up all of my energy before the start of the race, or whatever it was. So nerves, in my work as a sport and performance psychologist, are absolutely not bad. And I would always prefer to work with an athlete who was very nervous than with an athlete who claimed never to experience any nerves whatsoever. And the reason for that is because in almost all situations, the nerves are coming about because the person wants to do very well. In fact, they want to do so well that they start to worry a little bit about things such as letting other people down and the results and so on and so forth. And we'll get to that very shortly. But in my professional experience, it's normally a very good sign that the person is really motivated. And I would always prefer a highly motivated, nervous athlete over a unmotivated athlete who doesn't experience any emotion whatsoever. I would always prefer that. But of course, we are aware that sometimes emotions can get so strong. The feeling of nerves, for example, can get so severe that it can actually result in things like loss of appetite and feeling or being actually sick prior to a race. So we want to make sure that you have some techniques specifically to make sure that that doesn't happen. In other words, you keep hold of the good aspects of nervous energy, as I call it, pre-performance anxiety, competition anxiety, but we get rid of the bits which are having a negative impact on your performance. So that's a very important thing for us just to mention right there. So let's move on and start to explore what do we do about nerves. And this is where we're taking the ideas that would have been covered in Meta for Sports, which, if you recall, was very much focused on including mindfulness into your daily or weekly lives. Let's take it to the next level, and let's start to think about different techniques which might be particularly effective at different times for you as competitive athletes and coaches, if you're watching, any of you are coaches. So the first thing we want to do is we want to break down the time frame into 3 different chunks. So as you can see there, let me just see, I'll click on that. I've just got a raised hand here. Let me see if I can, okay, none there, answered. Okay, I couldn't access the raised hand there. So I'm not quite sure if there's a question there. So just to reiterate, I wouldn't be using the raised hand feature of the webinar. If you've got a question at any point, tap it into the Q&A section, which I have open here, and your answer will appear as soon as you type it in. Okay, so we've got 3 different time periods which we want to work with. We've got well away from competition, we've got close to competition, and then we've got just before and during competition. And one of the attendees from yesterday asked, well, what do you mean by well away from competition? So we'll just clarify that. So well away from competition is probably anything further than 3 or 4 days out from a competition that you are going to take part in. Close to competition is probably 3 days, 2 days, and the day before. And then, of course, just before, during competition, I would suggest would be the day of a competition, as well as during it. So, for example, many sports will have natural breaks in them. So track and field events often have heats. So they may have the lead up to the first heat, and then they have a heat, and then they have a break, and then they have a heat, and then they have a break, and then they may make a final. So it would be unfair for us to simply give you some suggestions for up to the beginning of that first heat, when in actual fact, many of you may take part in sports where there's an hour or so in between 2 significant parts of your competition. So the reason for breaking down the time into 3 different categories like this is because the sports science is very, very clear on this. And that is the cognitive or thought-based techniques for trying to handle emotions such as nerves should not take place too close to the competition. And the reason for that is basically down to psychobabble warning, something called metacognitions, and that is the disruptive effect of trying to change your thinking. So trying to change your thinking at certain times is a very sensible idea. For example, earlier when I said to you that from my point of view, nervous energy is certainly a sign of a highly motivated athlete, I might have changed your thinking a little bit there. And therefore you may have a different way of thinking about nerves moving forward. But as we get closer and closer to the competition, we want to really make sure that we are not accidentally muddying up our thoughts by trying to think a particular way. For example, the research is very clear that we can influence our thoughts and we cannot control them. And therefore we want to pick and choose the times in which we're going to attempt that. So the reason we break it down into time categories is because during bullet point 1 there, we can actually try and use some thought-based ideas. And I'll show you how to do that. But as we get closer to the competition, we're going to stay as far away from those thought strategies as possible and rely on something much, much, much more dependable, as I will show you. And of course, some of you will already be aware of the basic premise if you've completed the Meta for Sports program. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll continue to focus on nerves, but now we'll focus specifically on strategies according to these 3 time frames. And I'll brace you for another couple of polls here. So let's focus on nerves well away from competition. So we're talking about off-season, we're talking about pre-season, we're talking about maybe just after a competition where there's a 2 or 3 week gap before the next one. We can quite legitimately try and become better at managing our nerves using the power of our thinking. So I've got another couple of questions for you, standing by for poll number 2 and poll number 3. Oh, did that appear the entire time? I do apologize if the poll was omnipresent there in the entire time. Okay, so poll number 2, are you ready? So poll number 2, again, have about a minute to try and answer these questions. So which of these feel like they contribute to pre-competition nerves? You can select more than one answer. Okay, 50 seconds, 12 out of the 18 of you. I'll give you 20 more seconds. Okay, 10 seconds. 15 of the 18 of you have submitted at least one answer. So I'll count you down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and I will share the results with you. Interesting, of course, it's completely anonymous, so we have no idea who selected which answers. But as you can see there, there is quite a nice mix, suggesting that the reasons that some of you have experienced a lot of nervous energy in the past is probably some sort of combination of these. So what happened in the past, 2/3 of you have suggested that that might be a contributing factor. Concerns about the weather, almost half of you. Concerns about the future, half of you. A results mindset, half of you. Focusing on other people, 60%. Concerns about equipment, 40%. Worrying about worrying. That's a very interesting one. That's the actual snowball effect, whereby you start getting concerned about the fact that you're actually worrying, and that makes you worry more, and that makes you more worried, etc. And snowballs. Concerns about how you're feeling as well, 67%. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask you another question immediately, and that is, let me launch it here. So which of the same aspects of performance are controllable? Again, you can select more than one answer if you wish. So it's exactly the same list as before, but now I'm getting you to select the answers for anything on that list that you think are controllable. And as you can see there, the final item is if you feel like none of them are controllable. So I just had a question while you're doing that, that one of you cannot see the poll questions. Hopefully that was a while ago. If you can't, it might be that you're watching it on a smartphone and you might need to toggle between different options. I'm not quite sure there. So hopefully I can see by the number of people answering the poll that the majority of you can see the poll questions. All I can suggest, if you can't see the poll questions, that you try and play around with your features a little bit. Okay, 13 of the 17 of you have voted. I'll give you another 10 or 15 seconds. Again, your answers are completely anonymous here, so you can pretty much put whatever you want. It's not going to come back to you. This is not like a teacher picking you out in your classroom whilst you were daydreaming and then you being embarrassed because you didn't even hear the question. It's nothing like that. So there is still 3 of you who have yet to submit an answer. I would ask you to bite the bullet and just select what you think is the most appropriate answer in the next 5 or so seconds. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll. That pep talk did nothing, no answers. Okay. And I'm going to share the results with you now. Okay. Okay, so just a quick recap on what we're doing here and the context for this question. We're a long way away from competition here. We're in the pre-season or the off-season, or we still got 2 or 3 weeks before competition. Of course, in non-sporting context, you could replace the word competition with school exam or driving test or first date, anything that produced a level of nerves which you felt like you wanted to do something about. Therefore, we can use a little bit of reframing or thinking in that process, because we're not close to the competition, and therefore there's no risk of us getting too tangled up in our own thought processes. So the correct answer is the bottom one. None of the above are controllable. What this might suggest is one of 2 things, and I'm very mindful of the way that I say this, given that you're all very busy young people, is that either you have not completed the Meta for Sports program, which has been made available to you completely free of charge as members of the Academy of Sport. So that's not a free program for everybody, but we've worked out a way for it to be free for you. Or you have watched it, but you haven't necessarily been paying the kind of attention that we would like you to have been paying. That's evident in the fact that none of you have selected the right answer. So I thought that might take place. So what I've done is I prepared a slide which explains why all of those, so the past, surroundings, the future, results, other people, equipment, thoughts, feelings, are all uncontrollable. But what I would suggest that you do is your ability to go in and watch the videos from Meta for Sports will expire in early May, so I checked this morning. And therefore you can watch those videos as many times as you want between now and early May. In fact, the last 2 webinars that we have in early May will be a few days before you are unable to watch those videos anymore. If it were me and I had any kind of ambitions to be a really good athlete, or really good anything, to be honest, I would really be taking advantage of the fact that you can watch those videos as many times as you want between now or over the next 5 weeks or so. It might require several viewings for it to really have the impact that we know that it can have on athletes in terms of improving aspects such as their motivation, emotions, thoughts, team unity, and focus. I'll just close that. And I will just close that. Let me just check, a little question popped up here, open question. Okay, so just got a comment there from somebody. I did watch the videos, but maybe I misunderstood the question. So the question, thank you for that comment. I'm not going to mention your name, so appreciate that during webinar feedback. So the question was really simple. Which of these items that you've just all told me contribute to nerves is controllable? Which of the items is controllable? And none of that list is controllable, and I will be showing you that now. Thank you for that comment there. So we're still talking about using thought processes to potentially influence our nerves in a positive way. So this might now start to seem familiar with you. I am mindful of the fact that you might have, some of you may have watched that video 2.5, 3 months ago, and you might have forgotten. I suppose the psychologist in me can't help but feel if you've forgotten, then it's of no use to you, and therefore we might need to do something about that. Okay, so it's a very simple concept. This is one of the founding principles of sports psychology. It's really sports psychology 101, to be honest. And we use it all the time in the work that we do with athletes who are already at the very top of their games, right through to young developing athletes such as yourselves. So it's a very simple concept. We've got a whole bunch of areas. Let me just move this here. And we put it into 3 categories, and we call this shape the smart bell, because it looks a little bit like a dumbbell, but it's not dumb. It's quite the opposite. It's a very intelligent thing for you to be aware of. It's a very useful thing for you to be aware of. And quite simply, you've got 3 aspects that are uninfluenceable. So your genetics, your past, and your surroundings, environment, and weather. That's what SEW stands for: surroundings, environment, and the weather. So it doesn't matter what you do about those, they're not going to change. And of course, a number of you put the memories of the past, or the past, as being a contributor to nerves. So what I would be saying is that you may want to reframe that in the knowledge that even though what might have taken place in the past wasn't particularly pleasant, the fact is, and we are using facts here to reframe these, the fact is that you can't go back in time. You don't have a time machine, you can't go back in time. And therefore, I would be reframing the nerves caused by memories of the past very much in terms of, well, I can't go back in time. I can't control the past. And then, of course, we have these middle items: results, thoughts, feelings, stuff, which refers to equipment and clothing and all these other things, others, and my future. And these are what we call the influenceables, as you can see there from the label at the bottom. And as the label suggests, these are all things that you can influence. And this is the real key. Being influenceable does not make it controllable. And the mentally strongest, which are often the best performing athletes on earth, seem to be very good at being able to distinguish between what is influenceable and what is controllable. Really good. In fact, so good that most of the time when we go through this exercise, they kind of say, unnecessary, move on. And that's the level that we're trying to get you to. Obviously, the answers to the poll suggest there is a fair amount of work to be put in order for us to get there. So we've got the influenceables here, and the influenceables are all of the items that I just popped up on the poll there. So results, mindset, worrying about worrying, that's my thoughts, concerns about my feelings, stuff refers to the equipment, concerns about other people, and then the future. So again, long way out from competition. The more familiar you are with this smart bell, we call it the CIU smart bell, the controllable, influenceable, uninfluenceable smart bell, the more likely it is that those kinds of thoughts are not going to cause nearly the same extreme levels of nerves that they might do in someone who had no idea that this existed. And by the way, that would be 99% of your competitors. This is not something that is common knowledge. That's why I'm presenting to you tonight. If it was common knowledge, it would be a waste of everybody's time. Okay, so the way I'd be reframing all of those thoughts that might be causing particularly high levels of nervous energy is you're not dismissing their existence. You're not saying that results don't exist. We're saying that results are not controllable. They're only influenceable. Your thoughts are not controllable. They're only influenceable. Other people are not controllable. They're only influenceable. And therefore, because they're only influenceable, by logic, by definition, you cannot guarantee them. And therefore, they may not always end up being as you would like. Results is an absolutely fantastic example of this. So we know that you can try as hard as possible and still not get the results that you want. The flip side, of course, is also true. You can not try particularly hard and end up winning something. And that results mindset is absolutely fine if you're aware of the fact that you are only influencing your results. Many sports and many coaches are very guilty of implying that results are controllable, they're guaranteeable. The old cliche, if you try hard enough, you can achieve anything. That's completely incorrect. The correct factual version of that is if you try hard enough, you increase your chances of achieving various things. Of course, that wouldn't sell nearly as many t-shirts, I imagine. So the natural, I suppose, conclusion of this is, well, I've got to think of something. What am I going to think of? Well, I would highly recommend that the controllables, the 3 items to the left-hand side, are going to be by far and away your most useful ways of reframing various different thoughts related to why you might be getting particularly nervous. So as you can see there, we do have 3 aspects that are controllable. None of these items were on the poll. So your actions, the present moment, and my effort. Now, I'm very mindful of the time that we've got left. There's a significant chunk of the Meta for Sports videos, which is specifically dedicated to this. The chapter on thoughts, which would be the 3rd video, the 4th if you include the introduction, spends the entire time talking about this. So rather than me going through this in any more detail here and now with only 15 minutes left, what I would highly recommend that you do is take advantage of the fact that you can continue to watch those videos for the next 5 weeks. And in particular, see if you can get your head around the CIU Smart Belt. If you can't, then let me know. Send me an email and I'll a specific email of exactly which aspect of it you don't understand, and I'll endeavor to assist you. But I don't think it makes sense for me to do that in a predictive manner. Try and watch the videos again, and then obviously any of you that still struggle with it, we can address those as they come up. Okay, so let's focus on nerves closer to competition time. So you may recall that we said that from addressing nerves perspective, a long way from competition, we can use our thought processes. How do we do that? I would recommend the CIU Smart Belt, which very specifically explains that many of the things, most of the things, almost all the things that cause nerves from a thought perspective, which is not everything, of course, are likely to be things that you can only influence or have no influence on whatsoever. Closer to the competitions, we probably want to not try to use our thoughts too much, as we've just learned. They're only influenceable, and therefore we'd probably like to start relying on some more reliable mental methods. And with that in mind, I've got a couple of other polls which I'm going to ask you. So we're closer to the competition now. We're 2 days or 3 days out. Let me just quickly, there's a question just popped up. Okay, that's not a new one. Okay. Alrighty, that's good. Carrying on. So the 2 more poll questions coming up. Okay, poll number 4. Okay, so I'm going to launch the polls again. Maybe try and answer a bit quicker here because we've only got just under 15 minutes, and I'd love to finish on time. Which of these methods do you think is most effective for helping athletes handle their everyday emotions? Again, you can select more than one answer. Try and answer as quickly as you can. Okay, 11 of the 16 of you. So let's try and hurry it along, give you 10 seconds, and then I will close it. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And click now or forever hold your peace, ending the poll, and I'm going to share the results with you. Some interesting answers there. So by the narrowest of margins, 10 votes to 9, you have worked out the answer that I would certainly pick in my experience, and that's regular mindfulness is absolutely the uber mental skill, mental method when it comes to helping people to manage their emotions. I've just got a pop-up here. I'm just going to click on here. All righty, got a message from Dane there. That's good. Okay, all good. So I will try and do that. There's no link, Dane. You haven't included a link. So you'll have to paste it in there, and then I'll somehow do what I need to do. Okay, going back to the answers to this, I would suggest that trying to distract yourself might sound like a good idea, but we know historically has no real bearing. It might be a short-term solution, but it's not going to do anything in the long term. Let's skip over the answer that most of you have selected, regular mindfulness. So mindfulness only when you need it is certainly better than nothing, but mindfulness we know is like almost anything else, and that to become good at it, and when I say good at it, for it to then be effective, it really needs to be regular. So I would ask how you would go in sporting competitions if you didn't bother with training. You'd be all right, probably, wouldn't you? Some of you who are naturally sporty, but all those hours and hours and hours that you spend practicing is really what helped you to be successful in the competitions. And it's the same with mindfulness. Avoiding caffeine, I don't think that would make any difference. And luckily, you've all avoided the last one, taken out on coaches and teammates. So what I'll do now is I'm just going to ask you a follow-up question to that, and that is, I'm going to launch you here. Given the incredible usefulness of mindfulness, particularly from a managing emotions perspective, during the past 7 days, how often did you practice some mindfulness? And again, your answers are completely anonymous here, so you can put whatever you want, and no one will know what you selected. It's really just a way of me getting some sort of an idea. I'm not going to sell you on the benefits of mindfulness if you all do it 5, 6 times a week. Okay, just 15 seconds there. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, end the poll. That's the last poll for today, and then I'm going to share the results here. So again, small sample size, but 5 of you haven't managed, 3 of you once, 3 of you twice, and then 1 of you 3 times. None of you have managed more than that, and I suspect your reasoning for that is likely to be one of two. It may well be a combination of these. One is you have never tried mindfulness, so why on earth would you try and squeeze it into your weekly schedule? That's probably the first reason. The second reason is even if you had tried it, you're probably very busy and you would want to know when to do it. So once again, I suggest you go back, watch the emotions chapter in Meta for Sports. And at the end of that, you'll notice that I mention a couple of apps which are completely free to use, which get the ball rolling regarding mindfulness. It's incredibly difficult for me to convince you of the benefits of mindfulness using the spoken word. It's a little bit like trying to convince somebody of the benefits of exercise via the spoken word. You kind of just need them to get up and do something and feel that the endorphins, the benefits of the exercise, for them to be able to convince themselves. And it's the same with mindfulness. I have absolutely no doubt that in 20, 30, 40 years' time, mindfulness will be regarded as one of those obviously beneficial things to do, such as exercise, limiting alcohol intake, not smoking cigarettes, stretching, for example. At the moment, it's still somewhat mystical. And really, it needn't be mystical for any of you who have commenced, and let's just acknowledge those of you who have started trying to practice mindfulness, which is great. It's not mystical at all. It's not anything weird. It's a very simple process which gets you into the habit of noticing your thoughts and your feelings. And if you put that into the context of what we're doing now, as we get closer to the competition, that is incredibly useful as you are potentially experiencing some pre-competition anxiety, some pre-competition nerves and fear, example. If you've notched up once or twice a week mindfulness where you practiced the skill of just noticing your thoughts and your emotions and not judging them, of course, those emotions, nerves, in the case of the current example, aren't going to have nearly as big a role. I should confess, if I was taking part in the poll, which I can't as the host, I would have selected more than 3 times. So I try to squeeze in about 10 minutes of mindfulness every single day, and would normally succeed in at least 5 occasions where I actually start the day with 10 minutes of mindfulness. And for me, that's very significant because, as you probably worked out now by the way in which I delivered both the videos in Meta for Sports and this webinar, my mind moves very fast. So my mind has the potential to be thinking of 1,000 things as soon as I wake up in the morning. And the mindfulness really helps to just make sure that I have some time when I'm not too involved in my thought processes, if that makes sense. Okay, so we've only got a few minutes left, and there were some, let me just close that. Sorry, share results. Okay, close that one there. Okay, close that one there. Close that one there. Okay, so we've got a couple minutes left, and I suppose the question, the final question is just before competition. Remember, there were 3 time periods just before competition. What are we going to do? So if you think back to the CIU Smart Belt, what we're basically saying is the closer we get to the competition, the more reliable we need the stuff to be. And don't answer that question there because we'll run out of time if you actually submit answers to that question. So I'll just ask the question and then answer it immediately. When we get very close to competitions, we really want to focus on our actions. You remember that was one of 3 controllables, the other 2 being the present moment, which interestingly is very much about mindfulness, and effort as well, or how hard you try. So actions are the really useful go-to area as we get closer and closer to competitions. And the reason they're so useful is because they are controllable, because they are guaranteeable. So one of the things that I would ask you to start thinking about is, are you scheduling in a fairly predictable repetitive series of actions in the lead up to your competitions. You could call it a pre-competition routine if you wanted to. You don't have to give it a name. And are those actions things that you can always do? So for example, stretching is probably something that you can always do, but talking to others might not necessarily be something that you can always do. There might not be anyone around, for example. That's a very good example. Deep breathing is something that is a really useful action prior to competitions. And of course, it's no coincidence that these are amongst some of the most effective relaxation techniques. Listening to music is also an action, but what happens if your music playing device was not working or unavailable? So those are the sorts of things that I'd invite you to think when you start creating some pre-competition routines. Of course, the key to this is that because we're so close to competition, we are not trying to think a particular way. We know that trying to think a particular way in the lead up to a competition is likely to backfire, and that you will start to worry when you can't think that way. You know, my coach told me to think of X, Y, and Z, and I can't. So we spare you that angst by getting you to focus on things that are guaranteeable. Okay, so again, just to finish off with, and again, it sounds to me like one of the major things to get out of today is that many of you would benefit tremendously from going back and watching the Meta for Sports program, either for the first time or again. And I'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek as to the reason. So the Meta for Sports logo, which is very much our template for how we work with athletes and coaches from all around the world, has 5 triangles that are pointing inward, and the 4 of them have internal lines. One of them does not have any internal lines. And the purple arrow is referring to the triangle without any internal lines. And that is arguably the most effective mechanism for helping to reduce the impact of nerves on performance. But you're going to need to go back and watch that in order for you to exactly understand what that is referring to and how you can apply it to your own performance. So with that, we're exactly 6 o'clock on the dot. Before you go, I'm just going to make sure to see if I can somehow. So I've got a survey here, and I'm surprised that Dane, you couldn't. I'm just going to copy and paste the survey into the chat, and I should be able to do that. And more, and there we go. Okay, good. So, okay, so so we're done for this evening. I do thank you for your time, and I will see you in just over 4 weeks' time. I believe the last pair of webinars is all about communication, which is not a topic that is specifically addressed in too much detail in Meta for Sports. It is covered very briefly in the U section, in the Unity section, but we'll be going through that in a lot more detail. Communication, body language, facial expressions, for example, how to work on those in order to improve your overall performance. So I will stop presenting now. We would ask you to spend a couple of minutes, I've just sent it again, filling in the SurveyMonkey questionnaire, so that we've got a little bit of feedback, just so that you're aware. I don't know exactly who filled in what answers, so you can be brutally honest, and you can take it from me that if the criticism is constructive, then I will tend to implement it almost immediately. Hopefully you would have noticed that from the difference between the first 2 webinars and this evening's one, where there was some feedback about repetition. And obviously we've now made sure that that hasn't taken place. With that, I wish you all a great evening, and I look forward to seeing you in early May. Cheers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought if I closed, they couldn't do the survey. Okay, end meeting.